Hello there, my fandom friends! Today's video is going to be about my experience on the Avatar: The Last Airbender Braving the Elements podcast from Nickelodeon, featuring Dante Basco, the voice of Zuko from Avatar, and Janet Varney, the voice of Korra from The Legend of Korra. So the episode that I was on is from their season 3 in their podcast or YouTube or wherever you watch your podcasts. And the episode came out yesterday as of when I'm filming this, so May 21st, 2024. And so I kind of wanted to give the backstory of how I got invited onto this podcast, how it was all done, if you're interested in kind of hearing more about that story. But me and a friend of mine filmed this in November of 2023, and then of course, as you may know, the podcast came back in January of 2024, and they've been making their way through season 3 of Avatar. And so how this kind of all came to be is that maybe 2 years ago, me and a friend of mine who absolutely just adore and love Avatar: The Last Airbender decided to reach out to Janet Varney. We found her email, and of course, as you know, she's such a kind, open, and genuine person. And so we reached out and we asked, hey, we would like to be a part of the podcast if you're looking for super fans, if you're looking for people to talk about an episode or do trivia or whatever you need, we're here. We are super fans of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and we would absolutely love to be a part of this. Now, I wasn't really sure if we'd hear a response just because I figure they go through so many people and probably have so many emails with, you know, their acting career and for the podcast and whatnot. But she responded the next morning to me and she said, like, we would love to have you. And she basically transferred me over to someone else that was on the team that I could talk to about being on the podcast. And so I talked to that person over the course of however many months. It was a bit longer than expected that we waited because of the whole strike thing that happened with Hollywood, but we were still promised to be a part of the podcast whenever it was back and everything was looking good. And so me and my friend heard back that we would be joining for an episode about the season 2 trivia for the finale of season 2. So obviously that didn't end up happening just because of the strike and other things behind the scenes, but we were then later asked to be a part of the season 3 halfway point for trivia for Avatar: The Last Airbender. And we were so excited, honestly even more so than the first time, because season 3 is my favorite. I love season 3. Like, each season just gets better and better in my opinion, and so we were ecstatic to be on for trivia for season 3. Once we found out that we would be on for the season 3 trivia, we thought that we'd be against another group of people doing trivia, like as a friend group versus another friend group, but we had no idea. We weren't given a script. It was literally just all a surprise the day that we got into the podcast, which made it nerve-wracking, but also like so exciting because no matter what happened, like I would have had the time of my life, and I did. So of course there was trivia to study for Avatar, but there was also the thought that I would be meeting Dante Basco and Janet Varney over kind of like a Zoom call. That's how this worked, was kind of over a Zoom call. It wasn't through Zoom, it was a very much more professional thing that we used. But the thought of meeting them was just like, oh my gosh, like before the trivia, I just kept thinking like I would do so bad in the trivia just because I was sitting there with the voice actors that I look up to so much and enjoy their acting and their characters, and so I was like, I'm just gonna forget everything. Like, I was so nervous but also so excited at the same time. And so going into this, I had actually already met Dante Basco. I actually met him for the first time in Denver, Colorado for their convention of the state. I can't remember what their conventions are called. I think Fan Expo or something like that. But I met Dante Basco there and I was cosplaying Zuko and I didn't know anything about the podcast at that time. And so I just met him thinking, okay, I'll probably never see him again. Well, then the whole podcast thing happened and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. But then the podcast got pushed back, and I noticed that Dante Basco was going to be at the Uwu Con convention in Arizona, which I was going to. And so I met him again 2 or 3 times over the course of that weekend. And the first day I saw him, I told him that I was actually one of the people that was going to be on the podcast. And he was so excited. He was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna remember you, you know? And it was just so cool because I met him and like we got to know each other a bit before the podcast happened. And so when the podcast happened, we already kind of knew each other, and it was just this really cool thing. And I'm gonna say this so many times in this video, but I'm just so thankful and grateful for this whole experience. So leading up to the recording of the podcast, me and my friend had to attend a couple meetings with one of the people in charge of helping create this podcast. And so this person was kind of in charge of making sure that camera shots were okay, making sure our audio was okay. So it was really interesting going through the microphone we were using and the earbuds I was using, making sure that I had the right headsets and things like that. Something else that was really important and really interesting was making sure the background was appealing and appropriate for the podcast. So something that actually occurred was I was in front of these walls in my bedroom, and the green of my wall was reflecting so much that I couldn't sit here. And so that's something that we worked out ahead of time. We also worked out that I couldn't have any art on my walls that was from other animes like My Hero Academia and Demon Slayer, which I had in the background. And so I could only have avatar things in the background. Even art was a little sketchy because of copyright. So all of those things were like so interesting to learn. And yes, I'm not into like film or anything like that, but I do video editing of myself. And so it was cool seeing kind of the real life take on that, the professional side versus just making my little, cartoon AMV videos that I make on my channel. Okay, so the day of, probably what you've been waiting for, but everything else leading up to it's very interesting too, in my opinion. But the day of, I was so nervous. I was so nauseous. Again, I was having those thoughts of I'm just gonna fail this trivia because I'm gonna be so excited to see these people and be a part of this. But 30 minutes before the podcast, me and my friend met with the person in charge of the camera, audio, editing, everything like that. And we were just making sure everything was good to go. This is probably when I was feeling the most kind of just like out of body experience in a way, until Dante and Janet came. And I just turned into the biggest fangirl, as I'm sure you can see in the podcast if you watch the video on YouTube or if you listen to it on any of the podcast streaming services. I just went absolutely nuts. But we introduced each other and had a really good time just getting to know each other for a couple minutes, and then we got started with the podcast. But seeing them just like outside of their podcast from what you listen to, and like seeing kind of just like the face-to-face like real life interaction, they were just so wholesome and pure, like kind, respectful people. And I like all the people that helped with this podcast episode, so kind. Everyone knew that we'd be nervous, and so they were hyping us up, and they knew we'd be excited, and so they were being excited back, and like it was just so fun. I'm so grateful. But starting at the beginning of the podcast, as you heard or watched, hopefully, it was really cool because, especially in the beginning, Dante and Janet were going back kind of like in this skit type way, and they were even talking about how they'd never done something like that before, and so it was new for me and my friend's episode on their podcast. And so it was just so cool because it was like watching them act, because they were so just natural and like fluid, and it was just like, whoa, like I've never watched an actor or actress in that field like perform like that outside of just watching a movie or a show. And like I find voice acting incredibly interesting because their faces aren't shown in their shows, it's just their cartoon character. And so like seeing the people behind those faces, it's just the coolest experience. But I wanted to reassure you, if you think that this podcast is scripted or anything, I mean, it kind of is, because of course they have to think of questions to ask beforehand. They can't just ask random questions because that's probably not going to be fun. But we, as the superfans coming in, did not know hardly anything other than the theme and what to expect. And so all of the questions were that was our first time hearing them, and it was just so fun because it was just real trivia. There's nothing like fake about it, which like I love and appreciate. Also, shout out to the editor and everyone behind the scenes of making this episode come out. As you know, I'm a video editor myself, and of course my side of it is very different from all of those people. but they made the editing so smooth. And like, you already know this because you've listened to the rest of the podcast, but I know I stumbled so many times or maybe messed up a word or had a long pause, and like the people working on it took all of that out and just made it so smoothly beautiful. It looks like none of that happened. And like, they promised us that they wouldn't make us feel awkward and that they wouldn't make us feel like, oh my gosh, I messed up. And like, I just can't emphasize enough how amazing all of these people were that work on this podcast. And no, if you're wondering if I'm getting paid for making this video or saying these things, I'm not getting paid. I'm just saying this because I genuinely just wanted to share my experience on this amazing podcast because I thought many of you would be interested in it. And I just wanted to just fill out my heart, explode my heart out to these amazing people that work on it, because I would love for more people to listen to them and to support their art and their career. So yeah, that was my experience on the podcast. Of course, at the end, we had our goodbyes, and if you heard the podcast, you know that everything, it was so much fun, and I'm just so grateful. And if, you know, Dante or Janet or anyone's watching this that works on the podcast, like, I know I've already emailed them a couple times and said my thanks, but I just can't say it enough, and I literally just can't believe this happened. Like, this was definitely a bucket list item that I got to check off, and I'm so thankful. Something else that I wanted to share, and if you listen to the podcast, you already kind of know about this, but there was an Avatar Last Airbender group that I hosted for cosplayers in my area where I live. And so basically I just created a group of friends that I know and people that I know, and we gathered at a park and took a bunch of pictures with an amazing photographer. And so if you check out my Instagram, which I will share in the description and on the screen, you will see all of those amazing pictures. I cosplay Zuko, my friends do the rest of Team Avatar, and we have so many more to come. I have so many more plans in the future. I'm hoping to find more cosplayers that couldn't make it to this event, but I hope you check those out, and I hope you also enjoyed all of my cosplay photos that Janet and Dante were so generously sharing on the podcast itself. These are just a couple of example pictures from our group, but there are many more on my Instagram, more Zuko videos to come in my shorts on my YouTube channel, so be sure to check those out if you're interested. If any of you have any questions about my experience on the podcast, or have anything kind to say about it, or any comments on our pictures or any suggestions, I would absolutely love to hear it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!